Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Here are the stories we're following today.
Karen, the lift in futures this morning comes on signs that after 41 days, the longest government shutdown in U.S. history may be close to coming to an end.
Looks like we're getting very close from the shutdown. We'll never agree to give any substantial money or any money to really prisoners, illegals that come into our country. And I think the Democrats understand that.
That was President Trump speaking before the Senate voted 60-40 last night to advance a bill that would fund most of the government through January 30th while providing full-year funding for agriculture, Veterans Affairs, and Congress. 8 moderate Democrats broke with their party leaders to break the filibuster, including independent Angus King, who caucuses with Democrats. He says Republicans weren't willing to budge on Democrats' demand for a deal on expiring health insurance subsidies.
The question before us is how's the best way to get there? And it was our judgment, after 6 weeks, going on 7 weeks of this shutdown, that path wasn't working.
That was independent Senator Angus King of Maine. We get more from Bloomberg's Jill Teases.
The moderate Democrats that the Republicans were able to sway over to achieve this 60-40 vote say that they were promised basically another vote on some Obamacare tax provisions that was ultimately at the heart of the shutdown. So that could come sometime in December if that's, what was ultimately achieved here.
Bloomberg's Jill Teases reports it's still not clear how quickly the shutdown will end even after this procedural step. The Senate needs consent from all its members to end the shutdown quickly. Any one of them could force days of delays.
Nathan, while the shutdown continues, millions of Americans are still facing flight delays and uncertainty over government food aid. Now a federal appeals court has ruled against the Trump administration and its bid to only partially fund SNAP benefits, while it challenges a lower court's order to fund the program at 100%. The Department of Agriculture and other agencies have argued fully funding November SNAP benefits during the shutdown would limit funds for other programs. But the appeals court ruled that doesn't outweigh the harm of leaving tens of millions of Americans without food as winter approaches.
Now, the government shutdown has added to headaches for travelers across the country. U.S. airlines canceled more than 2,700 flights yesterday, mostly because of the shutdown and the Federal Aviation Administration's order to reduce air traffic. But compounding the problem was frigid weather, delaying thousands more flights. Bloomberg meteorologist Craig Allen is tracking the latest weather pattern.
The core of this unseasonably cold outbreak is plunging south and east this morning, and it's going to bring sub-freezing temperatures to about 36 states from the plains to the east coast. And rather than rise, the mercury may tumble all day as much as 20 to 30 degrees from highs on Sunday. So tonight's lows will be in the 20s and 30s. It'll be felt from the Canadian border all the way down to the Gulf Coast, with numerous record lows expected in Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, even Florida. And lake effect snow will also be a big problem, downwind of all the Great Lakes, but most notably running down the entire length of Lake Michigan. It's going to result in near treacherous to near impossible travel conditions, especially in Chicago and its suburbs.
That's Bloomberg meteorologist Craig Allen. Chicago's O'Hare International Airport is a major hub for United and American Airlines.
Nathan, President Trump suggested tariff revenue could be used to fund payments of at least $2,000 to most Americans. In a post on Truth Social, President Trump said that the government would soon begin paying down the country's debt. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says Trump's suggestion could come through the tax cuts passed in the economic policy bill earlier this year.
It could be just the tax decreases that we are seeing on the president's agenda. No tax on tips, no tax on overtime, no tax on Social Security, deductibility of auto loans. So, those are substantial deductions that, are being financed in the tax bill.
Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent made the comments on ABC's This Week, and you can catch the program Sunday afternoons on Bloomberg Radio.
And Karen, President Trump has reportedly pardoned Rudy Giuliani, along with other people allegedly involved in attempts to overturn the 2020 presidential election. Justice Department pardon attorney Ed Martin posted a list on X of prominent Trump allies who've gotten reprieves. It also includes attorneys Sidney Powell, Boris Epshteyn, John Eastman, and former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, along with 72 others. It does not include President Trump. The pardon document states that explicitly.
Well, Nathan, there are more signs. Tensions between the U.S. and China continue to ease. China has added more than a dozen fentanyl precursors to a list of controlled exports to the U.S., Mexico, and Canada. The move represents a step in fulfilling China's pledge to combat the flow of synthetic opioid ingredients to the U.S. Meanwhile, the Trump administration has suspended a probe into China's shipbuilding industry for 1 year.
Turning to the markets now, Karen, as we mentioned, futures are higher on optimism. The government shutdown is coming to an end. S&P futures right now are up 1%. NASDAQ futures up 1.5%. Valerie Titel tracks the markets for Bloomberg.
Well, look, I think for many weeks we thought there was really limited progress on the shutdown. We finally get a breakthrough, and we're seeing a very positive reaction from the equity market. Now, this all started on Friday. There was a steep reversal in the U.S. equity market into the close. And with futures following through this morning, we've now essentially erased half of the drawdown in the S&P 500. Last week was a really bad week for the equity market. The NASDAQ had its worst week since early April. The S&P 500 had a 5% drawdown from all-time highs at the end of October.
Bloomberg's Valerie Titel says the S&P 500 had risen for 3 straight weeks before last week's losses.
Well, Nathan, several stock strategists say solid earnings will fuel a market rally next year. Morgan Stanley's Michael Wilson says there were clear signs that an earnings recovery was underway. UBS strategists forecast the S&P 500 will hit a record 7,500 points by the end of 2026, and that's about an 11% gain from current levels. And Oppenheimer's John Stoltzfus says it's too early to give up on chip makers and the outlook for AI.
In company news, Karen, Pfizer has won the bidding war for the weight loss drug startup Metsera, securing the $10 billion deal after Danish drug maker Novo Nordisk said it did not plan to increase its offer. Metsera cited a call from the Federal Trade Commission regarding potential risks from proceeding with the proposed Novo deal structure.
And there's a new boss at Diageo, Nathan. The British drinks giant has named Dave Lewis as the new CEO. The former head of Tesco and chair of Haleon is set to take up the role at the start of next year. The announcement comes just days after the British drinks giant lowered its full-year outlook for sales and profits, citing weak demand in China and the U.S. And Diageo shares, they are up about 7.5% this morning. Time now for a look at some of the other stories making news in New York and around the world. And for that, we're joined by Bloomberg's Monica Ricks. Monica, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. President Trump wants the Justice Department now to investigate meatpacking companies. We get the details from Bloomberg's Amy Morris in Washington.
President Trump is accusing foreign-owned meat packers of driving up the price of beef in the U.S. He asked the Department of Justice to open an investigation. The president posted on social media that he wants a probe into whether companies are driving up the price of beef through, quote, collusion, price fixing, and price manipulation. Trump announced the move days after his party suffered losses in key elections in which the winning Democratic candidates focused on the public's concerns about the cost of living. In Washington, Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
Later today, President Trump will hold a historic meeting at the White House and welcome the new president of Syria. Ahmed al-Sharaa was once a leader of al-Qaeda in Iraq, but he severed ties with the terror organization and later overthrew Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. Edward Derezhin is a former U.S. ambassador to Syria and Israel.
It's a question of national security interests. What happens in Syria doesn't only affect the region itself.
He says it could affect relations with Israel and the entire Middle East. President Trump became the first sitting president to attend a regular season NFL game yesterday in half a century, not since Carter in 1978. He watched the Washington Commanders lose to the visiting Detroit Lions. And Blue Origin postponed a planned second flight of its New Glenn rocket yesterday in Florida due to weather conditions and unspecified ground equipment issues. The company says it's now reviewing opportunities for a new launch date and will eventually send 2 probes to Mars to find out why it lost its atmosphere. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Monica Ricks, and this is Bloomberg. Karen?
Thanks, Monica. Time now for our Bloomberg Sports Update, and for that we bring in John Stashower.
Thanks, Karen. On an NFL Sunday came the news of the death of Paul Tagliabue at the age of 84. He was the NFL commissioner from 1989 to 2006. First game of the day, the best game of the day. 5 lead changes in the first game ever played in Berlin, Germany. The Colts beat the Falcons in overtime. Jonathan Taylor rushed for 244 yards, scored 3 touchdowns. Also passing away Sunday was Lenny Wilkens, who's in the Basketball Hall of Fame as both a player and coach. He was 88. That's your Bloomberg Sports Update.
Stay with us. More from Bloomberg Daybreak coming up after this.
Coast to coast on Bloomberg Radio, nationwide on Sirius XM, and around the world on Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
Good morning. I'm Nathan Hager. Now more than 40 days into the longest government shutdown in U.S. history, the Senate has taken a major step to bring it to an end, advancing a bill to reopen the government without the health subsidy extension that Democrats had demanded. New Hampshire Senator Jeanne Shaheen is one of the 8 Democrats who broke ranks.
I understand that not all of my Democratic colleagues are satisfied with this agreement, but waiting another week or another month wouldn't deliver a better outcome.
It's New Hampshire Democrat Jeanne Shaheen following the 60-40 vote to advance this legislation in the Senate. And for more, we are joined by Bloomberg's Jill Teases. Jill, good morning. Walk us through the deal that was made between Democrats and Republicans and what ultimately got these 8 Democrats to crack. Good morning.
Yes, good morning, Nathan. So what ultimately happened here was this deal really only goes so far as funding part of the government, primarily Congress itself, plus the Department of Veterans Affairs, Department of Agriculture for the next year. And then it funds the rest of the government agencies through January 30th, just, kind of implying that, it's not going to be too much longer until we're kind of back here again. But it does, reach a deal at least then to fund the government through that time. Also, there's some agreements here about repaying furloughed workers, et cetera. So that's really where we stand in terms of, the crux of the issue here, the issue that Democrats really kind of had at the heart of why they were, what they were trying to double down on, that idea of extending those healthcare tax credits. What they've really only gotten from the Republicans here is a pledge that there will be a vote on that issue, on a bill on that issue in December. So nothing in terms of sort of like a long-term sort of fulsome commitment there. You really just have the opportunity for a vote sometime next month. I mean, whether that actually ultimately plays out in Democrats' favor, I think that's what you have to see here. But clearly, I mean, the fact that they did get these 8 moderate Democrats on board with them, I'm not sure that the rest of the party is going to be too happy about that kind of agreement. So that's kind of where we stand now. They'll go in for another vote in the morning, but that kind of paves the way for then a House vote there. But that's kind of where we stand. Yeah, that's something that Senator Shaheen seemed to allude to in that comment just there, with the fact that the Democrats had sort of held out against this idea of going forward with a promise of a vote on the subsidies. What does that say about where this bill could go in the House? Yeah, I mean, look, it's a good question. So I think in terms of, where we ultimately end up in the shutdown, I mean, I guess, the big difference here in terms of the House is that, I mean, the Republicans have a majority there. Maybe, you ultimately don't see as much blowback. But I think, it really does raise a lot of questions about, some of these issues that the Democrats have really been fighting for here, right? I mean, I think that the fact that they've even reached a deal here, it does kind of demonstrate how difficult it is for Democrats to use any kind of leverage they have in a Republican-controlled Washington to push back on Trump's agenda. I mean, this is something that, a deal they were trying to reach just kind of on healthcare tax credits, more meaningfully. They were trying to reach this for weeks. But, now, I mean, we're in the midst of the U.S.'s longest government shutdown ever. Clearly, they weren't able to, sort of make any breakthrough here. So we'll have to see kind of where that vote ultimately materializes in terms of, a future vote on healthcare tax credits in December, and whether the Democrats are able to actually take that and move it forward into any meaningful progress to accomplish anything on their agenda.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak, your morning podcast on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed by 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else you listen.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 92.9 in Boston, and nationwide on Sirius XM Channel 121.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, now with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto interfaces.
And don't forget to subscribe to Bloomberg News Now. It's the latest news whenever you want it, in 5 minutes or less. Search Bloomberg News Now on your favorite podcast platform to stay informed all day long. I'm Karen Moscow.
And I'm Nathan Hager. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.